We are in March 2026, and look at everything that is happening in the world. Israel and its allies have been engaged for months in a military escalation with Iran that no one knows how will end. Missiles are no longer a threat, they are a reality. The Middle East is in flames in a way we have not seen for decades. In Europe, the war in Ukraine remains unresolved. 3 years later, the conflict has changed. It is no longer only Ukraine against Russia. It is a geopolitical chessboard where every move could unleash something much greater. China watches, Taiwan trembles, and the South China Sea quietly boils. The global economy is fractured. The dollar is losing ground. BRICS is advancing with an agenda that is redrawing the map of global power. And in the middle of all this, people are exhausted by the news, exhausted by fear, exhausted by feeling that the world is heading towards some dark place and that no one has a map showing the way out. But here is what no one is telling you. More than 80 years ago, a man saw all of this, not on a screen, not in an intelligence report. He saw it with his eyes closed, in a state of deep trance, lying on a sofa in a small town in Kentucky. His name was Edgar Cayce, and among all the things he predicted, there is one that today is impossible to ignore. He said that during humanity's greatest period of chaos, the hope of the world would come from Russia, not from Washington, not from Brussels, not from any international organization, but from Russia. When he said it during the Second World War, it sounded absurd, almost ridiculous. Today, in March 2026, with the world as it is, it no longer sounds so absurd. And that is exactly what we are going to explore today. Who was Edgar Cayce? What exactly did he see? Why are his words about Russia circulating more widely than ever among spiritual researchers and geopolitical analysts around the world? And most importantly, what does all of this mean for you, for your life, and for the collective path we are traveling as humanity? Because this is not merely history, it affects you directly. If this content interests you, like the video now and subscribe to the channel. What is coming in the next few minutes will change the way you see the world. Virginia Beach, 1932. A desperate woman enters a modest room. Her son has been ill for weeks. The doctors have already given up. They told her there was nothing more they could do. Someone told her about Edgar Cayce. They said that this man could see things medicine could not see, that he would lie down, close his eyes, and enter a state that was neither sleep nor wakefulness, a place between worlds. She had nothing to lose. Cayce lay back, crossed his arms over his chest, and his breathing became slow, deep, almost imperceptible, and then he began to speak. He described the child's body with an anatomical precision that left everyone in the room speechless. He identified the cause of the illness. He prescribed a specific treatment involving herbs and procedures that no conventional doctor would have prescribed. The child recovered, and that story was repeated thousands of times. More than 14,000 documented readings, with people from across the country coming to see the sleeping prophet. Cayce's science could not explain healings that defied all medical logic. But Cayce did not only see illnesses, he also saw time, past lives, connections between souls, the destiny of entire civilizations, and what he saw terrified him, because not everything was light, and not everything offered easy hope. Cayce saw a century of brutal transformation. He saw wars, natural catastrophes, and the collapse of structures that had seemed eternal. But he also saw something else. He saw that on the other side of the chaos, something new was being born. There is something you need to understand about Edgar Cayce before continuing. This man did not seek fame. He did not charge fortunes for his readings. He lived with only what he needed, in a simple home with his family. He was a deeply religious man, a devoted Christian, who was sometimes terrified by what came out of his own mouth while he was in a trance, because he remembered nothing of what he said. When he awakened, someone had to read his own words back to him, and sometimes, upon hearing them, he would shake his head and say that he could not believe those words had come from him. That is the part that affects me most. He was not a showman. He was not a charlatan seeking attention. He was an ordinary man caught in something extraordinary that he never fully understood. And among everything he did not understand, there was one prophecy that disturbed him especially, one involving Russia, one involving the world exactly as it is today. But before we get there, you need to understand the context of when and why Cayce spoke about Russia. Because he did not say it only once. He said it in multiple readings in different years, with a consistency that is impossible to ignore, and always in the same tone. Not as a threat, not as a dark warning, but as a promise. The first time Cayce spoke meaningfully about Russia was in the 1930s. The world was emerging from the Great Depression. Stalin was consolidating his power. No one in the West viewed Russia as a symbol of spiritual hope. It represented precisely the opposite. And yet Cayce said something that even his own associates did not know how to process. He said that a new understanding of brotherhood among humankind would emerge from Russia, that something would be born in that territory, within that culture and among that people, that would change the vibration of the planet. He did not say it as a political prediction. He said it as a spiritual prophecy, and that distinction changes everything. Because if Cayce was right, what is happening in Russia today is not merely geopolitics. It is something much deeper. It is part of a pattern that began to be woven centuries ago and that is reaching its point of greatest tension right now, in 2026. Are you beginning to see the pattern? Stay with me, because in the next part we are going directly to the heart of the prophecy, and you will be left speechless. I am going to give you the exact words, because there is a great deal of confusion about what Cayce truly prophesied concerning Russia. Many people quote distorted versions, removed from their context, exaggerated, or simply invented. Here, we are going to the source. In one of his most frequently quoted readings, Cayce said explicitly that the hopes of the world would come from what we know today as Russia. And he added something fundamental that is almost always omitted: this would not come through what Russia was at that moment, but through what Russia would become. That distinction is critical. Cayce was not speaking about Soviet Russia. He was not glorifying communism or any political system. He was speaking about a future transformation, about a potential that lay dormant within that land and its people. A spiritual potential. Specifically, Cayce said that Russia would develop a form of brotherhood that the world would need, a different relationship between the individual and the community, a balance between Western materialism and something deeper. Now, in 2026, when you read those words, what do you feel? Because the Western world is experiencing an unprecedented crisis of meaning. Rates of depression and anxiety are at historic highs. People have greater access to information than ever before, yet they feel more lost than ever before. Extreme individualism has left millions of people feeling alone in the middle of a digital crowd. And what is happening in Russia today? This is where it becomes interesting, and also where you need to think for yourself, without being carried away either by the Western narrative or by Russian propaganda, because something undeniable is occurring in that country. Russia is experiencing a massive religious and cultural resurgence. The Orthodox Church has regained an influence it had not possessed since before the Bolshevik Revolution. There is a return to communal values, ancestral traditions, and a spirituality that the Soviet world tried to erase for 70 years and could not. Is Russia perfect? Absolutely not. Does it have serious problems? Yes, enormous ones. But Cayce did not say that Russia would be perfect. He said that something the world needs would come from there, and that is very different. There is another element of the prophecy that almost no one mentions. Cayce connected Russia's role with a broader cycle of planetary transformation. He said that before this potential could manifest, there would be a period of tremendous upheaval, and that old structures would have to fall so that something new could emerge. Does that sound familiar? Because that is exactly what we are experiencing. The old structures are creaking. The post-war world order, which had remained in force for 80 years, is being challenged from every direction. Not only by Russia, but by China, the nations of the global south, and movements demanding a multipolar world in which the West no longer dictates the rules of the game. And in this reordering, Russia stands at the center, not necessarily as the hero of the story, but as the catalyst, like a stone falling into water and producing waves that reach every shore. But here is something I want you to remember. Cayce also warned about the danger of misinterpreting this prophecy. He said that the hope coming from Russia would not be a gift arriving from outside. It would not be Russia saving the world through armies or political power. It would be an idea, a vibration, an example of inner transformation capable of inspiring everyone else. And that transformation, according to Cayce, would begin with individuals, with ordinary people awakening to something greater than themselves. People like you, people searching amid the chaos of 2026 for something that carries real meaning. And what comes next in this video is the part of the entire prophecy that affects me most, because Cayce did not speak only about Russia in the abstract. He spoke of dates. He spoke of specific signs. He spoke of how to recognize that the moment was approaching, and some of those signs are already here. Cayce described the future the way a doctor describes symptoms, with precision, detail, and a calmness that contrasted with the magnitude of what he was saying. And among all the signs he mentioned for this period of global transformation, there are 5 that today, in 2026, are impossible to ignore. The first is the collapse of trust in institutions. Cayce spoke of a time when humanity would lose faith in its leaders, governments, and formal religious systems. Not because they were all corrupt, but because collective consciousness would be evolving faster than the structures designed to contain it. Do I need to tell you how much people trust governments, the media, and institutions today? Global surveys of institutional trust are at historic lows in practically every Western country. The sign is here. The second is war in the heartlands of ancient civilizations. Cayce specifically identified the Middle East as a region of maximum tension before the Great Transformation. He spoke of conflicts involving peoples whose roots reach back to the oldest civilizations on the planet: Iran, Israel, Mesopotamia, the lands where humanity's first cities were born. Today, those same lands are in flames. The sign is here. The third is the breakdown of the global financial system as we know it. Cayce spoke of a profound transformation in the way humanity understands and manages money, and said that systems based on debt and the centralized control of wealth would reach a breaking point. In 2026, the dollar remains the global reserve currency, but for the first time in decades its dominance is being challenged in a serious and organized manner. BRICS has launched alternative payment mechanisms. Gold has returned to the center of geopolitical conversations. Cryptocurrencies have evolved from an experiment into a regulated reality. The system has not collapsed, but it is creaking. The sign is here. The fourth is a massive spiritual awakening outside traditional religions. This may be the most surprising of all. Cayce predicted that during this period, millions of people around the world would seek a genuine spiritual connection outside formal churches and temples, not as a rejection of the sacred, but as a search for something more direct, more personal, and more authentic. And what is happening today? Traditional religions are losing followers throughout Western countries, but at the same time, interest in spirituality, meditation, expanded consciousness, and life purpose is at historic highs. People have not stopped searching for God. They have stopped searching in the places where they were always told He could be found. And that is exactly the movement Cayce described. The sign is here. The fifth, and this is the one that makes me pause the most, is that Cayce spoke of a generation that would be born with a different sensitivity, a more expanded consciousness, and an innate ability to perceive connections that previous generations could not see. He called them the souls of the new cycle. Today, psychologists and educators speak of generations that process reality in fundamentally different ways, that reject pure materialism, that seek meaning above stability, and that feel viscerally that something in the world needs to change. Are you one of them? If you are watching this video, if something within you resonates with what you are hearing, there is a real possibility that you are, and that matters. Because Cayce was very clear about one thing. This is not a process that happens to humanity from outside. It is a process activated from within, through every person who awakens, through every consciousness that expands its understanding beyond fear, beyond noise, and beyond the narrative of everyday life. Every time one person connects with something greater than themselves, the world changes a little. That may sound like a beautiful phrase, but Cayce described it as a physical law. And there is something else he said specifically about Russia that relates to this, something involving a kind of leadership the world has never seen before. There is a question being repeated in geopolitical forums around the world at this very moment. Where are the leaders? Not politicians, not generals, not the CEOs of multibillion-dollar corporations, but real leaders, people with a vision that transcends their own interests, figures capable of looking beyond the next election cycle, the next financial quarter, and the next news headline. The world is starving for that kind of leadership. Cayce spoke about it, but he did so in a surprising way. He did not speak of one individual leader. He did not speak of a political messiah or a charismatic savior who would arrive and solve everything. He spoke of a kind of leadership that would emerge from the collective soul of a people, and he pointed specifically to something in Russian psychology and history that, according to him, contained the seeds of this different kind of leadership. What did Cayce see in the Russian soul? He spoke of a capacity for collective suffering which, when properly processed, creates extraordinary spiritual depth. And this is not about romanticizing suffering. It is about observing a genuine historical pattern. The Russian people have endured things that most contemporary Western cultures cannot imagine: Mongol invasions, Tsarism, revolution, Stalinist terror, the siege of Leningrad, and the Second World War, which in Russia was not merely a war but a civilizational catastrophe that left more than 27 million people dead. And after all of that, the nation remained standing. Cayce saw in this capacity for endurance not political or military strength, but something subtler, a different relationship with impermanence, loss, and what truly matters when everything else falls away. In the West, we have spent decades building systems designed to avoid pain at all costs, to optimize comfort, and to eliminate friction from life. The result is a generation that does not know what to do when pain arrives anyway, because it always does. Cayce said that cultures that had learned to walk through suffering, not to avoid it, but to transform it, had something to teach the world. And Russia, with all its complexity and contradictions, was the most prominent of those cultures in the century he saw approaching. Now, I need to be honest with you here. This prophecy is not a political endorsement of any Russian government, neither the current one nor any other. Cayce was absolutely clear in distinguishing between the soul of a people and its structures of power. He said that governments are accidental, imperfect, and temporary reflections of something deeper living within the collective consciousness of a nation, and what he saw in Russia was that deeper reality, not its government, but its soul. That is a distinction modern geopolitical debate almost never makes. We speak of Russia as though it were only Putin, only the Kremlin, or only the military, but there are 144 million people in that country, with stories, families, spiritual searches, and questions about the meaning of life exactly like yours. And according to Cayce, something within that people is about to manifest, something related to a synthesis the world urgently needs, the synthesis between the material and the spiritual, between the individual and the community, and between tradition and evolution. It sounds abstract. Wait, because in the next part we are going to see how this connects with something much more concrete, with the movements taking place in the world right now, with real geopolitical decisions taking a form Cayce described decades in advance, and with a specific window of time that he mentioned, a window that, according to his calculations, we are passing through right now. Cayce was not inclined to give exact dates. He did so infrequently, cautiously, and always with a warning that human free will could alter any timeline. But when he did give dates, he did so with a precision that defies rational explanation. He predicted the 1929 stock market crash years in advance. He predicted the beginning and end of the Second World War. He spoke of the rise and fall of the Soviet Union when the USSR was at the height of its power, and he left temporal references that several researchers of his work have connected to the period from 2025 to 2030. Why that period? Cayce spoke of cycles, saying that history does not move in a straight line but in spirals, and that there are moments when multiple cycles converge and create what he called turning points for collective consciousness. He described one of these turning points as occurring in the middle of the third decade of the 21st century. That is now. Specifically, he said that during this period, the accumulated tensions between the dominant model of civilization and emerging forces would reach their peak, and that the world would experience a kind of painful and chaotic labor crisis that was nevertheless necessary for something new to be born. A labor crisis. That metaphor is powerful because during childbirth, something bad is not being created. Something new is being created, and the pain is not a sign that everything is going wrong. It is a sign that transformation is taking place. Now look at the world of March 2026 through that lens. The war in the Middle East between Israel and Iran has reached a scale that is drawing in regional and global powers. It is not merely a local conflict. It is a point of tension where control of oil, geopolitical influence, religious narratives, and the interests of powers fighting to define the order of the 21st century all intersect. Russia and China are watching, calculating, and in some cases intervening in ways that are reshaping alliances that once seemed permanent. NATO is more united than ever on its eastern flank, yet deeply divided in its long-term vision. The Global South, that collection of countries treated for decades as a chessboard by the great powers, is developing its own agency, its own voice, and its own agenda. And at the center of this reordering, Russia is playing a role with no clear precedent in modern history. It is not Imperial Russia. It is not the USSR. It is not the chaotic Russia of the 1990s. It is something that is still taking shape. And precisely that is what Cayce described, a moment of formation, a moment when possibilities remain open, when the ending has not yet been written. Because here is the part of the prophecy that shakes me most. Cayce said that this outcome was not guaranteed. He said that the potential was present and the conditions were aligned, but that the result depended on something beyond leaders, armies, or economic systems. It depended on consciousness, on how many people in how many places throughout the world chose at this moment to awaken, to choose love over fear, understanding over judgment, and connection over separation. Every person who does that inner work, according to Cayce, contributes to a collective field of energy that tips the balance, not metaphorically, but literally. And I know that sounds like magical thinking to many people, but consider this: every revolution in human history began with a change in the consciousness of individuals. Before the external world changed, something changed in the way people thought, felt, and related to reality. It has always been this way. And Cayce said the next great transformation would be no different. It would begin with you, with the person watching this video right now. Do you want to know exactly what you can do with all of this? How can you connect this prophecy with your real life, your purpose, and what you are building in the middle of the chaos? That comes next, and it is the most practical and profound part of everything we have discussed. There is something no one tells you when speaking about prophecies. They speak about the future as though it were a movie that had already been recorded, as though you only needed to sit down and watch it, as though destiny were something that happened to humanity while you observed from outside. But Cayce had a completely different vision. For him, every soul has a role in the collective tapestry, not a grandiose role. You do not need to be a political leader, a spiritual guru, or a public figure. You do not need to change the world from a stage. You only need to be real, conscious, and authentic to what you came here to do. And how does that connect with Russia and everything we have discussed? Like this, Cayce said that great collective changes have a fractal structure. What happens on the macro level also happens on the micro level. What needs healing within civilization also needs healing within every individual. Humanity is going through an identity crisis. It does not know whether it is its history, its potential, its wounds, or its dreams. It is trapped between a past that no longer works and a future that has not yet taken clear form. Does that not also sound like something personal? Most people who seek content like this, who seek spirituality and purpose, are at precisely the same point internally, between who they once were and who they are being called to become. That is not coincidence. It is resonance. And the way to contribute to the collective transformation Cayce described is not by perfectly understanding geopolitics or possessing every spiritual answer. It is by doing the inner work that no one else can do for you. What is that work? First, radical honesty with yourself. Cayce insisted on this. He said that the greatest source of chaos in the external world is the chaos that people have refused to confront within themselves, and that the more people avoid their own shadows, the more they project those shadows outward, onto a political enemy, another country, or another group. He said that the healing of the world begins when someone has the courage to face what they do not want to see within themselves. Second, consciously choosing love over fear, not as a sentimental emotion, but as an operating principle, a compass for making decisions. Does this choice come from fear, or does it come from love? Does this reaction come from fear, or from love? It is a simple question, but a transformative one when you truly apply it to the small things every day. Third, connecting with something greater than yourself. It does not matter what you call it: God, the universe, the source, higher consciousness. What matters is that you are not operating solely from the ego, from the small self that sees only its own immediate benefit. Cayce said that the small self is necessary but insufficient. The great moments in history, the ones that truly change humanity's course, always involve people who acted from something greater than their personal interests. And fourth, and this may be the most practical of all, pay attention to what is emerging within you right now. You are not watching this video by accident. Something within you searched for this. Something within you is responding to these ideas, and that something deserves attention. What resonates most deeply from what you have heard today? What question has been activated within you? What part of you feels that it has a role in what is coming? That resonance is not noise. It is information. It is your soul speaking to you in the only language it truly knows how to use, the feeling that something matters. And what matters, according to Cayce at this specific moment in history, is not that you understand the entire geopolitical landscape, but that you remain awake and choosing consciously. Because there is something I need to tell you at the end of this video, something Cayce said about the people who hear this kind of message, how they respond to it, and what he said will surprise you. We have reached the end, but before closing, I need to tell you something I did not mention anywhere earlier in this video, something Cayce mentioned almost in passing during one of his final readings before his death in 1945. He said that the people who, during times of greatest confusion, actively searched for truth, who refused to settle for the official narrative, and who asked questions beyond what was obvious, would have a special role in what was coming. Not a role of power, not a role of fame, but the role of an anchor, like trees with deep roots that do not fall when the storm comes and that, without anyone seeing them, hold the soil together so that everything around them does not collapse. If you are here, if you have reached this point in the video, there is already something within you that is exactly that, an anchor. And the world of 2026 needs anchors more than ever. Look at what is happening outside. The conflict between Israel and Iran has escalated to levels that no one would have believed possible 2 years ago. Negotiations fail. Missiles are no longer a threat, they are routine. And behind that visible conflict lies another invisible and deeper conflict concerning which model of civilization will dominate the next century. Russia remains on the board, more influential than the West would like to admit. China watches with strategic patience. The countries of the global South have stopped asking permission and have begun building their own rules. The dollar remains king, but a nervous king. BRICS continues to advance. Gold has returned to the center of conversations that ignored it for decades. And in the middle of all this, ordinary people, you, me, and the 8 billion people who inhabit this planet, continue waking up every morning. We continue trying to build something meaningful. We continue loving our families, seeking purpose, and wondering whether what we do matters. That is the most human thing there is. And Cayce saw it. He saw that during moments of greatest systemic chaos, the everyday lives of ordinary people become the true spiritual battlefield. Not government palaces, not military headquarters, but kitchens, conversations between friends, and the small decisions no one sees that build tomorrow's world brick by brick. Now I want to be direct with you about the prophecy itself. I do not know whether Russia will literally become the hope of the world during the coming years. I do not know. No one knows with certainty. What I do know is this: the idea behind Cayce's prophecy is truer today than it was when he first expressed it. The idea that the world's salvation does not come from the top down, does not come from a government, a military power, or a more efficient economic system. It comes from the inside out. It comes from people who quietly decide to be different, who decide not to reproduce the fear they receive, who decide to process their own pain instead of passing it on, who decide to ask questions instead of assuming, and who decide to connect instead of divide. That is what Cayce called brotherhood, an ancient word that sounds simple but contains something revolutionary. Brotherhood does not mean agreeing with everyone. It does not mean erasing differences. It means recognizing that behind all differences there is something shared that is more real than any border, flag, or ideology, humanity, consciousness, and soul. And this is where the prophecy becomes personal. Because I did not come to speak to you about Russia so that you would remain focused on geopolitical news. I came to speak to you about Russia because Cayce's prophecy uses Russia as a mirror reflecting something that needs to awaken within you, the ability to transform suffering into depth, the ability to sustain community when everything is creaking, and the ability to keep your connection with the sacred alive even when the world appears to have lost its way. In what part of your life are you being called to develop that capacity right now? Where are you resisting a transformation that you already know is necessary? Which relationship? Which belief? Which version of yourself has already completed its cycle and is waiting for you to release it so that something new can be born? Those are not rhetorical questions. They are the true spiritual work of this historical moment. Cayce died in January 1945, 4 months before the end of the Second World War. He did not see the world he helped describe, but he trusted that it would come. He trusted that decades later there would be people who continued searching, who continued connecting the dots, who refused to settle for the surface of things, and who understood that the history we are living is not merely politics and economics. It is soul. It is evolution. It is the slow and beautiful process of a species remembering who it is. You are part of that process, not as a spectator, but as an active participant. Every decision you make today, every moment in which you choose consciousness over autopilot, every time you ask yourself why you are here instead of merely surviving the day, you contribute to that invisible field Cayce described, the field that tips the balance, the field that, when joined with millions of people like you, becomes the true hope of the world. It is not in Moscow. It is not in Washington. It is not in any place you can find on a map. It is here, right now, within the consciousness that chooses to awaken, and that consciousness is you. Until next time. M.